year, 1971. Voting rights get established for 18-year-olds. Disney creates their House of Mouse in Florida. There is a new index on Wall Street. And we lose two of the brightest stars in rock and roll in the same year. Take a ride back with me as we experience 1971, the year in rock. As I talked about in my 1970 video, Janis was an enigma. A light that burns so bright with all the stuff that legends are made of. On this magnificent release, you have the song Cry Baby, and perhaps her legacy song that will enshrine her in the hearts of everyone who listened to her, me and Bobby McGee. Janis died during the making of this album, but that doesn't take away from anything from the power and the finesse that she brought to this album. So for one last time, R.I.P. Janis. David Crosby had been through it. His girlfriend at the time had died, so he set forth on his boat, the Mayan, as he traversed the empty waters. So obviously, the record came from a very, very dark place. He would go on to say that it was a triumph of music and happiness and friendship, my main magics, over this monstrous sadness. I felt like I'd won. Performed by Jerry Garcia and a host of the members of the Grateful Dead, this album has a stirring quality to it that will make most people smile silently and perhaps even shed a tear when you realize what he was going through at the time. Most of the best art is made through pain, and by that logic, this was art to the nth degree. Live at the Fillmore East by the Allman Brothers was recorded over a couple of days, from March 12th through the 13th. To say that it had an impact is to do a disservice to the record. The Allman Brothers put together a collection of songs for the ages with this record, and contemporary reviews of the album put it into a context that's easy for people to understand today. George Kimball of Rolling Stone opines, "The Allman Brothers had many fine moments at the Fillmores, and this live album must surely epitomize all of them." He would also say about the band that they were the best damn rock and roll band this country has produced in 5 years. Now, current reviews aren't much different. Another person from Rolling Stone, his name was Mark Kemp, gave the album 5 stars in a 2002 review and commented that these shows remain the finest live rock performance ever committed to vinyl, and the album captures America's best blues rock band at its peak. If you've never listened to this album, do yourself a favor and go and listen to it, because you will come out of it with a new appreciation for the genius of Greg and Duane Allman and Dickie Betts and Butch Trucks, and also Barry Oakley, which we will sadly learn about a little bit later in this video. There is a phrase that is often uttered about geniuses. Towering genius disdains the beaten path. It seeks regions hitherto unexplored. Jim Morrison, by this point, had almost become a mockery of himself. He was a drunken guy who had most assuredly let himself go. And why wouldn't he, if you consider the time period that he had the world in the palm of his hand, starting with 1967 with the Doors' self-titled debut, up until late 1970. He had been accused of lewd behavior in Miami. A lot of press didn't understand why he was so weird, and he wanted to throw his rock star life away to become a poet. It's in this world that we find ourselves giving into this mammoth album that I believe sums up the attitude of the band. From Ray Manzarek's cool as a cucumber keys, to Robbie Krieger's fingerstyle playing of the guitar, to John Densmore's amazing drumming, to the aforementioned Morrison playing up the idea that you could see this band at your local coffee shop. They created a vibe that you just heard something special. But unfortunately, that would be their last album. In a world full of rock stars and cutesy pop, there is a soul singer that comes out with an album that tackles the Vietnam War and ecological issues way before everyone else jumps aboard the train. That singer is Marvin Gaye, and he blew up the room with his release. Affected by his own brother's letters from the war, seeing the social ills that plagued the United States at the time, he broke free from the Motown-centric idea that he just released love songs, and he created what is possibly the greatest album to be released by the label to date. He said, "I didn't know how to fight before, but now I think I do. I just have to do it my way. I'm not a painter, I'm not a poet, but I can do it with music." Fight he did, and he influenced so many. With all the benefit concerts for war and hunger, he was a trailblazer that set music down a political path that many people still adopt to this day. Man, Marvin Gaye. The Fillmore East was everybody's favorite gig to play. It was the Carnegie Hall of rock and roll. Dickie Betts, Allman Brothers Band. Yes, after only 3 short years, Fillmore East and consequently Fillmore West were closed for good despite good box office receipts. Originally opened as a Yiddish theater in 1926 called the Commodore, it then turned into a Lowe's movie house, then the Village Theater. But when Bill Graham bought it, he turned it into the Fillmore East on March 8th, 1968. Now, he opened the show with a varied bill, as was his style, with Big Brother and the Holding Company, Tim Buckley, who was the father of Jeff Buckley, and Albert King. Its closing was seen as a passing of the torch to bigger venues, but they wouldn't go down without a bang. The closing night show was a star-studded gala affair with the Allman Brothers, the Beach Boys, and more. After closing its doors, the venue would continue under another name for a time, before it was turned into a dance club called The Saint. And in more recent times, the lobby has become an Apple Bank and Savings, and the performance hall is now apartments. Now, in my opinion, this is a very sad ending for this behemoth of a club that saw the likes of Allman Brothers, the Grateful Dead, the Who, Jimi Hendrix, and many, many others. It changed rock and roll, but much like all things in rock, it was temporary. Jim Morrison was found dead in his apartment in Paris. Jim Morrison, the son of a rear admiral in the Navy, was born on December 8, 1943, to a super strict household. He spent most of his childhood moving from place to place. He kept his grades up, so he went to UCLA and stayed to graduate to avoid the horrifying Vietnam War. Once he was out of school, he focused on music, much to his father's chagrin. His father even went so far as to discourage his son from music at all by saying, "Give up any idea of singing or any connection with a music group because of what I consider to be a complete lack of talent in this direction." Wow. During those early years, he met Pamela Corson, a normal girl. Now, her penchant for drugs alongside of Jim's own penchant for drugs made for strange bedfellows. On July 3rd, Jim was found in the bathtub, dead. Now, there are a ton of conspiracy theories as to what actually happened. One is that Jim faked his death to avoid publicity for the rest of his life. Another is that Jim actually overdosed at the Rock and Roll Circus, a Parisian night spot known for rock and roll, drugs, and sex. Supposedly, Marianne Faithfull, a stalwart of the scene at the time, said that her boyfriend sold the drugs that killed Morrison. She would say, I'm sure it was an accident, poor bastard. The smack was too strong, yeah? And he died. And I didn't know anything about this. Anyway, everybody connected to the death of this poor guy is dead now, except me. Her boyfriend at the time was
Jean de Breteuil,
and he supplied the heroin that Jim took. Regardless, Jim also joined the 27 Club, but he will always be remembered as a rock and roll poet. Misunderstood, yes, and often imitated, but never replicated. Black Sabbath releases Master of Reality. Following up their debut album with the second album, Paranoid, Black Sabbath goes on to create, in my opinion, their greatest album with Master of Reality. With songs like Children of the Grave, Into the Void, and Sweet Leaf, they expanded on their proto-stoner rock vibes, full of tritones, aka the Devil's Interval, and doom. Ozzy had recently discovered heroin and was on fire during the recordings, but not everyone in the band had the hair on fire attitude about the recording. Tony Iommi would go on to say, "During Master of Reality, I think we started to get more experimental and began taking too much time to record. Ultimately, I think it really confused us." Regardless of the confusion, the record wasn't an instant hit with the critics, with the Village Voice's Robert Christgau saying, "a dim-witted, amoral exploitation." But more recent reviews of the album paint it in a legendary light. Rolling Stone said of the album it represents the greatest sludge metal band of them all in its prime. I think it's safe to say that after all this time, Black Sabbath laid their indelible mark on this year, 1971, and all of the early 70s. The Who releases Who's Next. This landmark band released what I consider to be one of the greatest albums of the classic rock era when they released Tommy. If you haven't heard it, I highly suggest you do so. But for the next record, they wanted to repeat the composition-based rock and roll that they had become known for. Who's Next started off as a concept record, not unlike Tommy. It was originally called the Lifehouse Project. But after a series of shows at the Young Vic in London, that idea was scrapped, and guitarist Pete Townshend basically spiraled into a nervous breakdown. The band was on the verge of breaking up. However, abandoning Lifehouse gave the group extra freedom, owing to the absence of an overriding musical theme or storyline, kind of like Tommy. This allowed the band to concentrate on maximizing the impact of individual tracks and providing a unifying sound. With songs like Behind Blue Eyes, Baba O'Reilly, and Won't Get Fooled Again, amongst the others, it's easy to see how by dropping the pretense of a storyline, the songs gained power on their own. Now, this album, unlike many other albums of the time, was a hit from the moment it was released. Everyone from the Village Voice to Rolling Stone, they all loved it. With one reviewer from the Village Voice, Robert Christgau, stating that this release is the best hard rock album in years. And the love for the album only grew over the years, influencing everyone, and everyone giving the album love. For me, this is a top 10 record of all time. It only gets better the more you listen to it. John Lennon releases Imagine. There are a million artists out there, and none of them can replicate what John Lennon did with this very simple song. Imagine has been covered by over 200 artists. Madonna, Stevie Wonder, Joan Baez, Lady Gaga, Elton John, Diana Ross, and many, many more. It is easy to see how this song in particular has captured the hearts of everyone. Recorded in John's house, hey, shout out for the original home studio guy. Phil Spector captured the honest fragility of John Lennon, a man beset by paradoxes and hypocritical ideas, but for some reason it just made sense to everyone who heard it. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. There is a plaintive cry in those lyrics. It's so simple and reductive, but it is also true. The entire song is a hymn that we should all strive for. And being that I am the son of someone who liked to be called a hippie a lot, I agree with it wholeheartedly. Duane Allman dies. In late October of 1971, the world mourned a true superstar. Duane Allman, the guitar player for the Allman Brothers Band, would end up having a bad accident due to a little bit of speed and some bad luck. He survived the initial crash, but unfortunately the 3-hour surgery didn't go as expected, and he died. It is impossible to try to sum up Duane's short 5 years, can you imagine that? 5 years. But storied career. To say that he is influential, just take a look at Lynyrd Skynyrd or any of the other Southern rock bands that came out after he died. They were all influenced by Duane. The perfect slide guitar master. He played on so many bands' hits. He even played on Layla, which I talked about in my last video, as he was asked to join Derek and the Dominoes by Eric Clapton himself. He died at 24, and what the world lost at that time just can't be stated. R.I.P. Duane. It's sort of a sad irony that the bass player of the band, Barry Oakley, died nearly a year later, only a couple of blocks from where Duane died. Barry was known to be completely devastated by the loss of Duane, and some people have even pointed out that it might not have been an accident. But if you listen to Whipping Post from Live at Fillmore East, you get the idea of how important Barry was to the band. Led Zeppelin releases Led Zeppelin IV. I mean, what can I say that hasn't already been said about Led Zeppelin IV? It has a host of songs: Black Dog, Rock and Roll, Battle of Evermore, Misty Mountain Hop, Going to California, and the granddaddy of them all, Stairway to Heaven. Now, this was mostly recorded at a former workhouse, Headley Grange in the UK, and also Island Studios in the UK. They sought to find a center and a cool base of operations, and they found it at Headley Grange. Now, their previous album, Led Zeppelin III, was panned by the critics, so they set forth to rid themselves from all distractions. And in that vein, they found the solace and the quiet surroundings bred creativity. Robert Plant wrote nearly all of the lyrics on the album there, and John Bonham's legendary drum sound came from recording in the huge 3-story entryway. From the very beginning with Black Dog all the way through to the end of the record, they set themselves apart as the band to take over the 1970s. Much like their fellow countrymen, the Beatles, did in the 60s, this record has gone on to sell 24 million copies, and that's just in SoundScan alone. The countless numbers of times that this record has been taped, burned, whatever else the kids do these days is staggering. And yet it remains the same through the last 50 plus years. A kick-ass rock record. Montreux Casino burns, and Deep Purple writes a song that everyone knows. So picture it, December 1971, Switzerland, right by Lake Geneva. Frank Zappa and his band, the Mothers of Invention, are on stage at Montreux. 2,500 kids are in the audience. A guy yells, "Fire!" and the kids stay put. What transpires next is the entire casino burning down. Now, how it started is definitely up for debate, but the end result would be a complete loss for the casino. And here is where Deep Purple comes in. They were in town to record their follow-up to the massively popular album Fireball, and they were going to use the aforementioned facilities to record the album, and they suddenly had 0 places to do so. So they looked around, they found a theater to record in, but the locals complained of noise, so they had to move again. They ended up settling on a mostly empty hotel and set up shop. Ian Gillan, the singer, thought about everything that had happened in the past few days and decided to write a song about it. Thus, Smoke on the Water would be born. It is rather insane to me that it is a true story. But there you have it. And next month, we have 1972. And there is yet another Deep Purple connection to 1972. There it is, the year in rock, 1971, in a nutshell. Now, what moments from 1971 did I forget? Which moment were you surprised to learn about? And which moment made you look back on that year with fondness in your heart? Leave that down below in the comments. And as always, guys, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And also, as always, don't forget to rock out.